first Trump administration actually tried to weaponize unlawful entry prosecutions by separating over 5,000 children from their parents. The entire country, Republican, Independent, and Democrat, was horrified at this, and the administration ultimately had to abandon their family separation policy. With President Trump's poll numbers tanking on immigration due to his kidnapping and disappearing of immigrants and U.S. citizens off our streets, let me point out the absurdity of spending this valuable floor time on a bill that has harsh, ineffective, mandatory minimums for immigrants, while the majority affects one of the greatest cover-ups of our time, covering up the horrific abuses of Jeffrey Epstein and his network of child traffickers and sexual predators. Why fight a bipartisan discharge petition from Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna to release all the damn files, not just the ones that the Trump's DOJ allows to be released?
When Representative Pramila Jayapal took the floor, her message cut through the noise. While Republicans distract Americans with fear-mongering about immigrants, they're helping cover up one of the darkest scandals of our time, the Epstein network and the system that enabled it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 3486. This bill is Republicans' latest attempt to scapegoat and fearmonger about immigrants. With President Trump's poll numbers tanking on immigration due to his kidnapping and disappearing of immigrants and U.S. citizens off our streets, House Republicans are once again looking to turn the conversation back to immigration and the border. Let me point out the absurdity of spending this valuable floor time on a bill that has harsh, ineffective, mandatory minimums for immigrants, while the majority affects one of the greatest cover-ups of our time, covering up the horrific abuses of Jeffrey Epstein and his network of child traffickers and sexual predators. Why not spend our time focused on justice for the incredibly brave survivors who have spoken out against the rich and powerful men that abuse them? Why fight a bipartisan discharge petition from Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna to release all the damn files, not just the ones that the Trump's DOJ allows to be released? Why not speak out against the cushy deal that Ghislaine Maxwell just got from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche to move to a cushy prison instead of serving her time as one of Epstein's main co-conspirators and groomers of young girls to be abused by Epstein and his cohort of rich and powerful men? Obviously, once again, my colleagues across the aisle want to try and distract us by returning to their tried and true playbook of demonizing immigrants. That is not actually what the American people want. We have seen over and over again the American people actually support immigration, despite all the lies that come from the other side. This summer, a Gallup poll noted a record high 79% of U.S. adults saying immigration is a good thing for the country. A Pew poll showed 60% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's suspension of most asylum applications, which was ruled unlawful in federal court. The American people now see that the Trump administration has continually lied about what they're going to do on immigration. According to a CBS poll, a majority of Americans believe that the Trump administration is not prioritizing the removal of dangerous criminals and public safety threats, and nearly 60% disapprove of how the Trump administration is using immigration detention facilities. This is not surprising in the least. As the ranking member said, ICE's own data revealed that roughly 65% of people in immigration detention have zero criminal convictions. Zero. It is clear that this administration is not targeting the so-called worst of the worst, as President Trump claimed on the campaign trail. Instead, they are targeting everyone they think they may be able to deport. Tom Homan, the president's so-called border czar, said that arresting non-criminals is, quote, our job. In Los Angeles, ICE has been racially profiling people, indiscriminately arresting and holding people, causing fear and terror in people of all legal statuses who simply look Latino or speak Spanish or congregate on certain corners. Today's bill is just more of the same scapegoating and lying about immigrants. Once again, the majority implies that somehow we don't already have consequences for unlawful entry and reentry. That is absolutely false. Current law already includes harsh sentences and are some of the most prosecuted laws in our country every single year. This bill would add ridiculous mandatory minimum sentences, going up to life potentially, onto the crimes of unlawful entry and reentry. Now, this makes no sense on multiple levels. If the administration is seeking to deport, quote, the worst of the worst, why put them in incarceration facilities? Perhaps this is just another ploy to give private for-profit prison companies more money so they can build more facilities, make more profit, and ultimately contribute more to the Republican campaign coffers. In addition, as the ranking member said in his statement, mandatory minimums just do not work. We have actually seen this over and over again. Harsh enforcement is not the answer. I don't know why my colleagues are having such a hard time with this. The first Trump administration actually tried to weaponize unlawful entry prosecutions by separating over 5,000 children from their parents. The entire country, Republican, Independent, and Democrat, was horrified at this, and the administration ultimately had to abandon their family separation policy. But still today, over 1,000 of these kids remain separated from their parents. And yet, despite this despicable, absurdly cruel policy, a 2018 study found zero statistically significant relationship between the family separation policy and the number of apprehensions at the border. These kinds of indiscriminate, harsh enforcement efforts are a waste of taxpayer dollars and detrimental to the kind of country that we are trying to create. The U.S. already has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, and it costs U.S. taxpayers about $182 billion every year, not to mention the social cost to lock up nearly 1% of the adult population. This bill would skyrocket that number. Now, actually, it was during the first Trump term that Republicans joined Democrats in actually rolling back some mandatory minimum sentences in the First Step Act that was signed by, guess who? President Donald Trump himself in 2018. But I guess all good policy is once again falling to the feet of the divisive political rhetoric around immigrants and crime that my colleagues across the aisle have embraced as their salvo to save them from the bleak economic picture our country faces today. Higher joblessness, Trumpflation, a host of reckless policies, including trade wars, that have cost the American people. The Republican big bad betrayal bill is unpopular everywhere in the country, no matter how you spin it, because Americans know that kicking 17 million Americans off of health care just so you can give a $7 trillion tax break to the wealthiest billionaire donors and giant corporations is outrageous, and the American people want us to roll it back. One more minute.
Additional 30 seconds.
In just 19 days, government funding expires. Right now, Americans across the country face rural hospitals that are closing, higher prices for back-to-school supplies, double-digit increases in healthcare premiums, and the Republican majority, what are we spending our time on? This terrible bill. What a giant abdication of the huge responsibility that the American people put on us here in Congress. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Jayapal's speech wasn't just about one bill, it was about political priorities. She called out the hypocrisy of a Congress willing to spend time criminalizing vulnerable immigrants instead of pursuing full accountability for the powerful. Think about that for a second. At a time when survivors of sexual exploitation are still fighting for justice, when documents remain sealed, and when people connected to Epstein's operation continue to walk free, House Republicans are debating harsher prison sentences for immigrants, people seeking safety, work, and opportunity. Jayapal's outrage touches a nerve that many Americans share: who gets punished and who gets protected in our system of justice. She reminded Congress that this so-called immigration bill is nothing new. It's another round of scapegoating and fear politics meant to distract from the uncomfortable truth that the wealthy and well-connected rarely face consequences. Instead of releasing the Epstein files, as lawmakers from both parties have demanded, leadership blocks transparency while pretending to stand for law and order. That's not justice. That's a cover-up wrapped in political theater. Jayapal pointed out that immigration is not the crisis Republicans claim it is. Polls show Americans overwhelmingly believe immigration benefits this country. They're tired of the lies, the propaganda, and the cruelty. Remember, this was the same administration that tore families apart at the border, separating thousands of children from their parents, a moral stain that still hasn't been fully addressed. More than 1,000 kids remain separated today. And what did that policy achieve? Nothing. Studies proved there was no measurable deterrent effect. The separations didn't reduce migration, they only inflicted trauma. It wasn't about border control, it was about control, period. Jayapal connected the dots between that cruelty and the profit motive behind it. When you fill private prisons with immigrants, corporations profit. The harsher the laws, the longer the sentences, the more beds they fill, and the more campaign donations they can make. It's a cycle of exploitation masked as patriotism. And the irony? Even Donald Trump himself once supported rolling back mandatory minimums through the First Step Act. Now, the same party that cheered that reform is back pushing mass incarceration under a new label. Jayapal's point lands hard. The GOP's obsession with punishing the powerless is a smokescreen. It keeps attention off their failures: economic stagnation, corporate greed, rising healthcare costs, and the ongoing erosion of accountability for those at the top. While Americans struggle with inflation, unaffordable healthcare, and collapsing rural hospitals, Congress is debating a bill that does nothing to solve those problems. It just manufactures outrage for political gain. And here's where Jayapal's warning becomes bigger than politics. It's about moral clarity. She's challenging the country to see the patterns. When lawmakers protect predators and prosecute the poor, that's not conservatism, that's corruption. When law and order means shielding billionaires while locking up desperate families, that's not justice, that's cruelty institutionalized. So the real question isn't whether her speech was fiery or partisan. The real question is, why is she the only one willing to say it out loud? The Epstein scandal isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a test of whether the United States still believes in equal justice. The refusal to release all the files, the leniency shown to accomplices like Ghislaine Maxwell, the silence from those in power, it's all part of the same sickness. A sickness where the rich escape, the vulnerable suffer, and the rest of us are told to look the other way. Jayapal refused to look away, and that's why her speech matters. Because behind the noise about immigration or crime or the border, there's a bigger story about power, accountability, and who this government really serves. If we want a democracy that actually means something, we can't afford to be distracted by scapegoats. We have to demand transparency. We have to demand justice, not just for the victims of Epstein's crimes, but for every person who's been trampled by a system that bends for the powerful and breaks the powerless. So, when you hear Jayapal's words, don't just hear another debate. Hear a call to action. A reminder that truth still matters, that empathy still matters, and that justice, real justice, only exists if we fight for it.